And we're about to move into our next presenter, Stan Collins.
All right, so that's me. I'm up now. Welcome, everyone. I'm Angela Brand. I'm with NAMI California, and I'm really excited to introduce everyone to our next speaker, Stan Collins. Before we get started, I wanted to let everyone know that while we use these events to create safe and open spaces for all of our attendees and presenters, that this next presentation is on a topic that some of you might find triggering or traumatizing, and wanted to let you know ahead of time so that if you need to step away, take a break, practice any self-care, or even just hop off and rejoin us for the next sessions, that we want you to have the space to do that. So as we move into that, again, it's my pleasure to introduce a longtime friend of the NAMI family, Stan Collins. He has worked in suicide prevention and postvention for the last 20 years and is the co-founder of the Directing Change program and film contest. He has worked in this field since losing a friend to suicide in high school, and is using his experience to support and develop strategies to change policy at the state and local level. Right now, he's working on the creation and implementation of suicide prevention curriculums and strategies, working with the California Department of Education to develop the model policy for youth suicide prevention in response to AB 2246, which is a California law that requires schools to develop and implement policies and strategies to support youth suicide prevention. Part of that includes the California Department of Education is tasked with developing and maintaining a model suicide prevention policy. So Stan works on that and a number of other things. I can't say enough about Stan. He's a huge friend to our family. He does a lot of work with our NAMI on campus groups. He is a huge outspoken advocate for this space. And so we're really grateful for his longstanding commitment to this work and continuing to hold space for the stories and needs for young people all over the state. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Stan. Welcome.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Angela. Chris, since I can see your face, can you give me a thumbs up? Can you hear me okay? See me okay? Perfect. 2 thumbs up. Oh, even better. So, hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Yeah, I've been part of the NAMI family for a really long time. I was a board member with NAMI San Diego for 6-7 years, but have been around NAMI and just love what you're doing and love that NAMI on campus is flourishing. And so I'm honored to be here. Before I jump into my presentation, and actually, I was so inspired by the last part of the conversation that I think I'm going to do a little switch on the fly, because I really want to speak to those amazing youth that we just heard from and all the youth that are out there. So again, what Angela mentioned was that I'll be talking about suicide prevention. So as much as that might be activating to any of you, I would love do take care of yourselves first and foremost. But I just want to emphasize that I'm going to be talking about hope. I'm going to be talking about prevention. I will not be getting into any details outside of the norm of just a conversation. So I do want to let you know that I'll do my best to keep you safe. So with that, I actually want to share a film with you from the Directing Change program to kick us off. It's a 60-second film, and then I'll come back, tell a story, and share my slides. So sit tight. Let me figure out technology in just a moment. All right, Chris, thumbs up. Can you see the video? All right, perfect. I'm going to go ahead and mute and play the video. I'll be right back.
Esta es la historia de mi amigo Tyler. Durante nuestro primer año de la escuela secundaria, comenzó a alejarse de nuestro grupo de amigos. Después de esto, se volvió al alcohol y las drogas. Traté de mostrar mi preocupación, pero no se había dado cuenta de que solo estaba tratando de ayudar.
Bueno, he estado pensando en esto por un tiempo ahora. No puedo seguir así viviendo de esta manera, a menos que algo en mi vida cambie. Así que al fin voy a hacerlo. Voy a buscar ayuda. Así que ha sido 2 meses desde que tenía pensamientos suicidas y estoy muy agradecido por Andrea, que ayudó a salvar mi vida.
All right, so that's a film from the Directing Change program. Obviously, that one talked about suicide prevention. Before I get into the slides and the content of suicide prevention, I wanted to tell a story to you all today. Some of you might have heard this, so I apologize, but hopefully it still gives you some hope. But I want to share this, I think, first and foremost with any of the youth who are out there watching today. So as mentioned, I've spent a lot of my life, in fact, most of my adult life, working in suicide prevention. And one of the most common questions that I get is, why the heck would someone choose to spend their entire life focused on suicide prevention? You know, I spend some weeks 40, 50, 60 hours a week talking, writing, thinking about a really difficult topic. But I was actually just presenting the other day at something, and they asked, you know, what did you want to be when you grow up? If you weren't doing this, what would you want to be? And actually, I'm doing exactly what I wanted to be doing. When I was in high school, I wanted to help have conversations about suicide prevention. And people will say, well, why? And unfortunately, my story starts pretty young. When I was growing up, I have an older brother. He's 4 years older than me. He had a best friend who had a younger brother. And so whenever our older brothers would go somewhere, me and Jesse would go with them. Our moms, I jokingly refer to it as an arranged friendship. Like, we were forced in the backseat, we'd go to the beach, we'd go to the movies, and we were kind of like just forced, like, get along, like each other. And now it was different because Jesse was, in my opinion at the time, way cooler than me. I was going to Comic-Con way before Comic-Con was cool. I was a pretty small for my age, self-proclaimed nerd. And Jesse was on the other end. Jesse was a cool guy, kind of ran with a tough crowd, kind of skater guy. And I just thought he was the man. And Jesse was also a year older than me. So I was really fortunate. Eventually, Jesse took me under his wing and kind of mentored me. And going into my freshman year in high school, I was lucky because me and Jesse ended up in the same fourth period geometry class together. So every day my freshman year, I knew that I could go to fourth period geometry class with Mr. Sked in the trailers, and our desks would be right next to each other. We'd hang out, learn a little bit about math, but most importantly, I'd get some time to feel safe. I always knew that I was safe in that classroom. And one day I was coming home from practice, and I was walking down the hallway of my house, and my older brother was coming towards me. And as he got close, he had tears in his eyes. And this shook me because me and my brother were very different people. He is a law enforcement officer, and he's pretty good as far as being open with his emotions, but not quite as, and maybe I'm too in tune with sharing my emotions. Like, I still cry when I saw the live action Lion King. I cry at Hallmark cards at Christmas, or holidays every year, birthday cards. So for me, seeing my brother have tears in his eyes, it really shook me up. And so I went up to him and I asked him what was going on. And I'll never forget what he said and how he said it when he told me that Jesse died by suicide. I was 14 years old. I'd never really dealt with death before. And now I was being informed that one of my best friends had died, and not just died, but died by suicide. And I remember the weight of the world hitting me with those words. And I remember just feeling that weight. And I remember stumbling back until I hit the wall, and I remember sliding down and putting my head between my knees and just crying for hours. And I was overwhelmed with so many different emotions. And for those of you, I know I'm not the only person here who's lost somebody to suicide. It was anger, it was guilt, it was shame, frustration, sadness, all the things. And I went to bed that night, cried myself to sleep, woke up the next day, and headed to school. And I probably could have taken the day off. In fact, my mom stayed home that day to try to encourage me to take the day off. And instead, I went to school. I was determined I got to be there. And it wasn't until I walked into that fourth period geometry class and I walked up, and those of you who go to, you have the temporary trailers in the back of your school, and there's that awful sound that is just, you feel like an elephant walking up. And I remember walking up, and as I reached for the door that day, I remember that I thought, maybe there's a chance that I'm going to open this door and Jesse's going to be sitting in his desk, and this whatever weird dream that I've been through over the past day is just going to go away, and Jesse's going to be here, everything's going to be fine. And instead, what happened was that day and every day for the rest of the year, I went to that geometry class and sat next to my best friend's empty desk. And every day for an hour, I sat there and wondered what I could have done, what I could have said if I would have stopped by, what if I would have created space for me and him to have more important conversations. And that's one of the things I love so much about NAMI on campus is it's empowering youth to have those spaces for these types of conversations. Now, at this time, it was back in the mid-90s, and we didn't talk about mental health in schools. We sure didn't talk about suicide. And so there was no crisis response. There was no support. It was kind of just go deal with it, figure it out on your own. Fortunately, though, that's not where my story ends. That's only the prologue. The real story is that a few years later, my father, who's also in law enforcement, came to me and he wanted me to come down and check out a presentation from the Yellow Ribbon Suicide Prevention Program. And to be honest with you, just hearing the word prevention attached to the word suicide, because the adults in my life, the parents and teachers and everybody had talked to me about, sex, drugs, and rock and roll and all the things that can put kids' lives in danger. And yet nobody had ever told me about suicide, which was the one way that my friend had died. And so I was excited. I said, yeah, let's check this out. And I went to the presentation and I walked away feeling really empowered. Like, man, why are we not talking about this in schools? Why did I not know that there were things you could look out for and questions to ask? Why wasn't I aware of that? And so I went back to my principal the next day and I brought him a packet of information. And I said, hey, let's do this. Let's talk about suicide prevention in the school. Let's talk about mental health. And he said, you know what, give me a couple of days. I'll look through it and we'll see, come back and check it out. So I came back a few days later and I asked him, hey, did you look at it? And he said, no, I got really busy. Come back in a few more days. So I came back a few days later and I got the same response. And I came back a few days later and we, got the same response. We did this dance for weeks and then months until finally I was just relentless. I was like, man, we have got to do this. Let's do this. And so finally one day I wore him down. He's like, all right, look, you're a good kid. If you think this should happen, you go raise the money. We'll make it happen. So I worked with the San Diego chapter of Yellow Ribbon and the national program. Dale and Daremi had created the program after losing their son to suicide. And we flew them out to California and we gathered all the youth, the students in the gymnasium to have this conversation about suicide prevention. Now, first, I should note that we don't recommend doing it that way anymore. A gymnasium is a horrible venue to have a conversation about suicide, but it's how we did it at the time. So here we are, my senior year. Everybody, all of my classmates, 3,000 students are crammed into the gym to have this intimate conversation about suicide in the most unintimate setting you could possibly imagine. And right before they're about to start, they looked at me, Dale and Dara, and said, hey, have you thought about what you're going to say? And I said, no, I'm not speaking. What are you talking about? That's no. And they said, well, we think your classmates would really benefit from hearing from you. And I said, okay. And I remembered that I had written a poem in memory of my friend Jesse during my writing seminar class. So I'm digging in my backpack and I pull out this crumpled poem. Here I am, my senior year, standing in a gymnasium full of my entire school. And I'm not only talking about one of the most uncomfortable topics about suicide and suicide prevention, but I'm reading poetry. And I am just mortified. Like, you are such an idiot. Like, what are you doing right now? And I stumbled through, I said something, I'm sure, and then I know I read the poem. The rest I just like blocked out. And I went home that night, skipped practice, and was just like, today sucked. Today was stupid. Just how naive could I ever be to think that I could have made an impact? And I went back to school the next day. Like, honestly, I remember getting up for school that day. And even though by senior year I had, gotten more connected, I was just so like mortified of like, what is going to happen when I get to school? And I was walking onto campus. The attendance lady had a window that faced the front of the school. And as I was walking up, I saw her make eye contact with me, and she turned around, walked out of the back of the building, and started walking across campus right at me. And I'm freaking out because I was a good kid, but the attendance lady is literally heat-seeking me out from across the campus, like coming to get me is what my head was at. And as she got close, I realized that she had a smile on her face. And then I looked down and I saw that she had an envelope in her hand. And she came up to me, and at the time I had no idea what these words were going to mean for my life or what this moment was going to mean for my life. But she handed me an envelope and she said, I have a gift for you. And I opened up the envelope and it was a letter from one of my classmates, a girl named Sarah. Now, Sarah didn't give me her last name, her last initial. If any of you know Sarah, please let her know. I would love to speak with her. But in her letter, she went on to tell me that she'd been thinking about ending her life for a long time, and that she had been overwhelmed and consumed with emotional pain, and that the day before, when we gave the assembly, it was the first time she heard someone else say the S word, say the word suicide. And she thanked me for sharing the pain that I had when I lost Jesse, because she was in so much pain and had so much just self-hatred, and just she had convinced herself that people would be better off without her. And me talking about the loss of my friend Jesse made her step back and have some perspective that maybe she had convinced herself differently. And she also thanked me for the hope that I shared, that as a youth, that we are willing to be there for each other, that we will listen and we will support, and we may not have all the answers, but we're willing to jump in the mud with you and be there and try to help you find hope or hold on to hope until you figure it out. And she went on in that letter to tell me that that poem that I was so embarrassed to read in front of my entire school, she had actually made copies of it, and she had shared it with her friends, and she had taken it and pinned it up next to her bed, and she was going to read it every single morning to remind her of her reasons for living, and basically went on that letter to say, thank you for helping me save my life. And I share this story with you today because suicide, mental health, but especially suicide and suicide prevention can feel daunting and overwhelming. And we will wonder what could we possibly do to help someone find their reasons for living? And it is so easy to feel overwhelmed by that very idea. And yet, as a 17-year-old with no training in mental health, no training in suicide prevention, simply because I was able to speak to it, say the S word, I was able to help somebody find their reasons for living. Now, I didn't save anybody's life. She saved her own life. She decided to make a different choice. But I share this story with you in the hopes that you never underestimate the role that you can have in helping someone find their reasons for living. Because in my opinion, when you whittle suicide down to its two most basic factors, it's about pain and hope. And suicide happens when pain outweighs hope. And who has better connection to our pain and our hope than our friends and our family? And to be in that space with somebody as they are contemplating whether or not they should be here or not. Again, to help them find that hope, to, not inject them with overwhelming hope, but just to hold on to that hope a little bit, just enough for today. And if we can turn the dial a little bit today, maybe we can turn a little bit tomorrow. And to sit there with their pain and to help them understand that their pain doesn't have to consume them. I think it's just about pain and hope. And don't ever underestimate the role that you can have in helping someone find that hope, reduce that pain. And for the youth that are out there that are listening, I really want to impress upon you. So from there, I ended up working with Yellow Ribbon, volunteering with them through college. A couple years later, I got the opportunity to testify before the United States Senate back in Washington, D.C. As they were drafting the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. I was 19 years old and I was testifying before the Senate. And so for any of you youth out there, you youth advocates, I want to impress upon you so much that even though the world tries to make you feel like you don't have a voice, you don't have power, you can't vote, some of you can't drive, you can't, do a lot of the adulting things. You have more power at this moment in your life than potentially you will have for the rest of your life. Your voice is so sacred and so precious and so dang powerful. Don't relent, don't hold back. About the whole nothing about us without us, like speak to that, lean into that, hold the adults in your life accountable, hold them accountable to have conversations about mental health, and not just a day, not just a week. Mental health is something that we are all capable of having conversations about, and it's not about having all the answers. It is simply about hearing somebody, listening to their pain, being present, and helping them find a solution that meets them where they're at. And so the one thing I do want to leave with you, though, in addition to that, is I'm totally just skipping my slides. I've thrown my whole agenda out the window. Angela and Nami, I'm really sorry for this, but I do want to speak to you a little bit about suicide prevention. A couple of things I want to cover. One is about terminology. You will hear people refer to suicide. When someone has died by suicide, they will say that someone has committed suicide. It's the most common phrase that we use. And I want to encourage you to try to change your terminology. I think over the past year plus, we've really understood how words shape our thoughts and our feelings. So we want to get away from the term commit suicide, instead asking that people use the term died by suicide, died of suicide. The reason for that is when you think of the term commit or actions that we have committed, we think of crime, we think of sin, we think of treason or perjury, adultery, a lot of negative things. And we want to avoid that, because framing suicide in that way, suicide is not anything to, if you have thoughts of suicide, we know that 1 in 5 youth will have thoughts in suicide in a given year. It's nothing abnormal. It's, sadly, it's somewhat part of the human experience, especially as a youth. It's not weird if you're having those thoughts. We need to let people know there's nothing strange. about it. It's actually really common. Questioning whether or not we should be here. I don't want any of you to ever be in that place where you have that pain, but if you do, it's okay. You need to talk about it. You also heard earlier, like talking about trigger warnings. As somebody who lost somebody to suicide, I want to ask you also to try to get away from the word triggering, because as ironic as this is, the word triggering is actually triggering for people. So I would instead ask you to use the word activating as a term that's kind of becoming commonplace. So that's a little bit about terminology. And that's important because it relates to messaging. And how we relate and talk about messages related to suicide is really important because it shapes our thoughts and feelings of the topic. And we have spent far too long trying to convince people that suicide is a problem. People already know that it's a problem. They know that it's an issue. What we need to do is simply, if we only have people's attention for a precious few moments to talk to them about mental health or suicide prevention, let's not spend that time convincing them of an issue that they already understand or agree is an issue. And let's spend that precious few moments teaching them what to do about it. Most people don't know what warning signs are for suicide, or if they do, they have a hard time connecting those signs of distress to risk of suicide. A lot of people don't know that it's okay to talk about suicide, which leads me to kind of my third and final point before we open it up for questions, which is that the most important thing we can ever do to help someone find their reasons for living is first to start by not being afraid to say the S word. I have a saying that goes, when we speak the name of the beast, it will retreat. And there's this book called Care of the Soul where Thomas More talks about the Minotaur, the bull-headed flesh-eating man who lived at the center of this labyrinth. And yet his name was Asterion, which means star. And he goes on in this quote in this book to talk about how when he sits with somebody with their depression or with their sadness, with tears in their eyes, that although we may be consumed by or distracted by the beast, the Minotaur, which is this kind of thought of suicide in this metaphor, let's not lose sight of the star that is at the center of that person and what makes them who they are. And to not be afraid to ask the question simply, are you thinking about suicide? So if you forget everything I said here today, please don't be afraid to simply ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be frightened of. As intimidating as it might be, as much as the Minotaur might try to distract you, don't lose sight of the star, which is the essence of that person. And when you're sitting with somebody in that pain and you ask them, hey, are you having thoughts of suicide? The next question has nothing to do with suicide, to be honest with you. It has to do with the pain. When you were a kid and you went to your parents and you told them you had a stomachache, what questions would your parents ask you? Or what questions would you ask somebody if they told you that they had a stomachache? You'd say, well, what makes it worse? What makes it better? How long have you been sitting with this pain? How long, a scale of 1 to 10, how bad does it hurt? And if one of your friends comes to you and says that they're having thoughts of suicide, or someone you know, family member, someone you love, or a complete stranger, you ever really thought about what makes it worse, what makes it better? But ultimately, and I apologize, I'm pausing because it told me my internet was unstable, is just being there and being present. And the most important thing I will say to you as youth is one of the predicaments that you will be put in is oftentimes people will say to other youth, I'm going to tell you something, but you got to promise you won't say it to anybody else. Because 60 to 80% of youth will communicate to a friend that they're having thoughts of suicide, but less than 25% of those friends will go on to tell an adult. And as a youth, you have to tell your friend, this is not something that I can do by myself or that we can do. We have to. Who do you trust? Who can we bring into this circle? Because we don't have to do this alone. And so with that, I'm going to close out and turn it over to any questions out there. Please don't ever underestimate the role that you can have in helping someone find their reasons for living, because suicide is not about wanting to die. It's about not knowing how to go on living. So in that moment, it's not about convincing somebody not to die. It is about helping them find those reasons to stay and to find that hope and to find that help. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and just say thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for the conversations today and tomorrow that are going to happen. To the adults out there who are supporting youth, please help convince them of how wonderful and powerful their voices are right now. And for any of you youth out there, if you are having thoughts of suicide, if you know somebody who's struggling, there is help, and I've been there. I know that it gets better, and it's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen overnight. But the best thing you can do for somebody in that pain is to sit with them and jump in the mud. And if you are having those thoughts, please, please tell somebody, and please talk to somebody, because there is no greater honor, in my opinion, than being entrusted with somebody's love and empathy and care. So with that, I'm going to open it up for questions if I'm allowed to. I'm seeing some comments come in the chat, so I'll check in with those. You've already probably picked up on this. I'm not really good at social settings as far as sticking to the rules. So Angela and Sophia, if there's questions out there, please tell me how to do this, or just tell me to sit down and be quiet.
No, please don't ever sit down and be quiet. I was seeing all the same things in the chat box, just how many people were moved by what you're sharing and the messages that you have. And so, to echo Jessica's sentiment, just, just kind of going off book and sharing, it's anytime this comes from the heart in this space, I don't think we can, ever go wrong. So I think that first and foremost, thank you for sharing your story and for being here with us today. Everyone is just feeling very inspired and hopeful through this. And so it's really great to see all those comments in the chat box, making sure that there's not actually questions that we skipped over. A couple folks shared a few resources. That's really great. Thank you all to those folks who dropped things into the chat box. There is one here. Excuse me, Stan, how can we contact you after this meeting? I'm on the board for the Community Alliance for Healthy Minds and would like to pursue with you speaking at our conference, which would be online this year. So I've got that information here. And then Stan, however you feel comfortable sharing your information as well.
That's funny. So you're with COM, which is actually based in San Diego. So I know Rex, I assume it's the same organization. Rex and Connie are my surrogate parents. So I think that's the same organization, but I'll type my email in the chat right now. Yeah, I'd love to connect, John. So thanks for the invitation. And yeah, anybody, if you think that I can help, I don't know, share some wisdom, I'd be more than happy to speak wherever. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
Yeah, I think that was John that just piped in. So is that COM down in San Diego that you were just referring to?
Yes, I know
Okay.
Rex and Connie really well.
Okay, great. I would be honored to present at COM. I love it's great. Just another good example of how our communities can come together.
Thank you.
Someone's asking about wording to use instead of triggering. So I use activating. Someone previously also offered content warning instead of trigger warning. I think the trigger, I don't think I have to get into the details. I think it's pretty intuitive as to why triggering can.
It paused for a second there on Stan's end, so.
Be triggering.
Oh, there you were.
Oh.
It jumped out for a second, sorry.
Oh, you know when I said the most inspirational, beautiful thing and no one heard it. So no, I was actually just thanking everybody for your kindness and your support. And again, to the youth out there, this started with a letter. Don't ever give up on your passion. And I know it sounds so cliche, to say be the change you want to see in this world, but you absolutely can be. And dig in and don't sit quietly. Speak loudly, be proud of yourselves, and I'm excited to see what you guys do, because ultimately it's us adults who to some degree have not done enough, and we are passing a heavy burden onto you, but I know that you are more than capable of carrying it further than we ever could. So just keep doing you.
I could not agree more. As a mom, I think it's very heavy sometimes to carry that. So I appreciate everything that you have shared with us today, for being here with us today, for all of you that are sharing, your thanks and your gratitude. And then also, the reminders too, that, we're constantly learning and, knowing when to change our language and, what words to use and, how to approach these topics. So thank you for that reminder. I want to do, go ahead.
Sorry, I totally forgot. The most important thing I should have shared with everybody, the one thing I'm really trying, can I have 30 more seconds?
Yes.
I mean, what are you going to do? Say no? That would just be I really want to encourage everybody. One of the things we really need to get people to understand out there is the use of the crisis resources, the National Lifeline, 1-800-273-TALK, the crisis text line. NAMI has a bunch of warm lines around the state. Don't hesitate to use those resources. You do not have to surpass a threshold of crisis before you reach out. If you have a bad day, if this presentation was activating to you, or it raised emotions, if today does, if you are concerned about a friend and you don't know what to do and you need some coaching, if a friend came to you and you're not sure where to go, if you don't know where to go, please do not hesitate to contact those resources. They will love to hear from you. That is what these folks have dedicated their lives to. Take those numbers, type them in your phone, share them with all your friends. They're also supposed to be on the back of your student IDs. So sorry, that was my last plug, but I think it's really,
No, thank you so much. And we'll make sure that those are all included in the follow-up materials that we send out to folks, as well as information on the Directing Change program. And then a quick time check, Sophia, I know that we're getting ready to move into workshops. Are we good to go on that?
Yeah, we're
All
good.
right.
We just need to make Anastasia the